Welcome to Interfaith Voices, Reverend Bell.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, most people understand that there are serious economic concerns when it comes to big banks and Wall Street. But what are the moral issues here? Why would religious groups be involved?
Well, I'm a part of a movement of religious leaders that are saying that America should be a land of opportunity for all people. And currently, it's not. People are trapped in debt. The few have become massively wealthy at the expense of the many. And religious leaders, of whom I'm one, are saying enough is enough, that large banks that drove our economy into the ground now need to be held accountable for the crisis that they've caused. And our sacred texts speak to us about this kind of responsibility in so many places. One such text that fuels my moral imagination is found in the Christian New Testament in Matthew chapter 18, where Jesus tells the story of the unforgiving servant. And this man, according to the story, owes the king 10,000 talents, it says, is a massive amount of money, and he's forgiven by the king. And once he's forgiven by the king, he goes out and he chokes his servant, who owes him a fraction of the amount that he was just forgiven. And this text always reminds me of the way that large financial institutions are relating to the American people at this time. They've been bailed out by the federal government. They've been saved from collapse in many cases. Our economy at a macro level has been, in some sense, rescued. But then these big banks and big financial institutions that have been rescued and forgiven in some sense go out and literally, the text says, chokes or strangles the small people, the people that own a home or have a small business, and the people that end up paying the price for the irresponsibility of these financial institutions are normal Americans who are trying to pursue what they've been told they have access to, which is the land of opportunity.
And so this is a fundamental question of economic justice for you.
It is. It's an issue of economic justice. I love the statement of Cornel West, where he says that justice is what love looks like in public, which is why churches, I think, are so appropriate spokespeople for this kind of a movement, because we are taught by Jesus to love our neighbor as ourselves. And if justice is what love looks like in public, then we have to go out in the public and fight for these folks that are being really misused and mistreated.
Now, specifically, what do you think big banks and Wall Street are doing wrong? Do you have a catalog of sins, so to speak?
Well, as I mentioned, they've received a tremendous bailout by the federal government, which, regardless of whether you think about the bailout and its merits, probably saved our economy from further collapse. And that bailout money was intended to move outward into our communities to stimulate our economy through lending and through mortgage modifications. And our big complaint about these banks is that they haven't been playing their side of the game. They've received this help, but they haven't passed it along. And so what we're saying is banks need to keep people in their homes. And there are many programs at state and federal level that banks can participate in to keep people in their homes, and they're simply not doing that. And so we're calling for principal reductions to keep people in their homes, that bring people's homes more in line with their actual value.
Reduction on the principal of their mortgage is what you're talking about.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, the mortgage, principal of their mortgage. That's right. As well as small business lending, which is all but shriveled up during this crisis.
Now, you're transferring money out of some of these large banks into community banks or credit unions. Are credit unions any better, I wonder? I've read that some of them, for example, do controversial payday loans.
Right, and I don't know that there's a category of financial institution that across the board is better. I think it has to do with the specific practices of the organization or the institution that you're dealing with. So what we're doing is we're investigating each institution that we're considering moving our money to, and that's what I would recommend that anybody do. You can't simply say, if it says community bank in the name of the bank, that it's going to be better, or if it says credit union, that it's going to be better. We have to look at payday lending, as you mentioned. We have to look at whether they've been modifying mortgages in a way that is in keeping with the programs that are available, whether they've been lending, in particular to poor communities and in communities of color where small businesses have suffered the most. And these are the kind of specific practices that we're looking at in terms of bank behavior.
Now, is withdrawing money really going to make any difference? Like, isn't your church money just a drop in the bucket for Bank of America?
You know, it really is, sad to say. In particular, our church is moving about just under $500,000 in annual banking, which really is a drop in the bucket. But, you know, there's more to it than just the actual dollar amount. What we're finding and our intention is that the moral voice of religious leaders speaking to this issue, and not only speaking but taking action in the way that we have by moving money, actually speaks louder than the actual dollars that we're moving. And the public relations side of the effect that that's having on banks, I think, is also very important. And so I do think that even though the amounts are small, the collective effort of churches and synagogues and mosques, you know, other religious groups moving their money is a very significant thing to do and is getting the bank's attention.
Now, has Bank of America or Wells Fargo or any of these targeted institutions, have any of them reacted to this movement or spoken to you at all?
You know, it's interesting. I actually got a phone call a few weeks ago from someone who was calling from the CEO's office of Bank of America. And we didn't connect for a couple of days. We kept playing phone tag, and I eventually spoke to her. She works for the CEO over all deposit accounts for Bank of America, and she was responding to a letter that I sent on the day that we did the press conference in front of Bank of America in Los Angeles. Those of us that were moving our money delivered a letter to the bank manager of that local branch and asked him to pass it on to Mr. Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America. And apparently they did, because she was responding to my letter. And she was trying to, say we, hate to lose your business because we've been banking with B of A for over 40 years, our church. So it gave me an opportunity to express to her some of our concerns, what we would like to see Bank of America doing. We asked her if we could have a meeting, either with the CEO, not me personally, of course, but our organization, with the CEO or with his representative to speak more about these issues. And she said she would check into it, but it seemed unlikely. And so far I haven't heard back. But they did call me, which I found significant and interesting. At
least they noticed.
Yeah, and I think it does go to the point that when people act together in an organized fashion to make their voices heard, that change can happen, and that we can get the attention of these large institutions.
And reportedly, many of those banks are sitting on huge piles of cash.
Well, I was just going to bring that up. I'm glad you mentioned that. I was just this last week looking at that story. Some estimate over $1 trillion in excess cash held by large banks, which could easily be infused into our economy. The story that I read said that $1.6 trillion in reserve, which is about 80 times the $20 billion that was in reserve in 2007. So the banks are holding in reserve this money that they've borrowed from the Federal Reserve basically for free, and they're not using it to invest in our communities. Sometimes people ask me, why are you divesting from Bank of America? Are you trying to damage them or put them out of business or something, as if I could? But my response is, Bank of America has divested from us already. They've divested from our communities, especially communities of color and poor communities where the recession has hit the hardest. They've divested from our families. And if you want to talk about, religious leaders and family values, this is a major cause of concern for our families. If you want to say, well, what values do my families have? They value being able to get a job. They value being able to stay in their home. They value being able to pay their rent. And when banks are sitting on this pile of cash and not assisting our communities, I would say they've divested from us first.
Why do you think overall it's important for religious groups to speak up about the banks?
Well, I think it's important that religious groups speak up about banks because we carry a moral trust for our society. I mean, we're not here to legislate morality, but we are here to speak with a moral voice